Well, as you know, if you've been coming to the church since September, we've been in this theme year, moving forward. And we've been talking about where have we been, where have we come from, who we are as spiritual people, and where are we going? What does the future look like? And so today and next week are my attempts to address this latter part of this theme year, the what does the future look like. But today I want to zero in more on what does your future look like, and more specifically, what does your spiritual future look like, or how do you envision yourself as a person of faith and a spiritual person in the next 10 or 20 years? What are your aspirations for yourself as a person of faith? So I was in California this past week, and I was at the Senior Ministers of Large UU Churches Conference, 45 of us who lead churches of 550 or more. We are the 5th largest church, which doesn't mean much, but it kind of makes you feel good and in good company. And we were talking this past week a lot about you, about the churches we serve, about what does spiritual development look like in the church. Specifically, we're talking about leadership. And the conversations affirm for me how much I love you and this congregation. Because this congregation both has a commitment to growing souls, to having a spiritual life and to building spiritual lives within its midst, but it also has a commitment to building leaders, to growing leaders in our midst. And it reminded me each time I was in conversation with my colleagues how special and important this church is in that regard. On my way to the meetings, Marianne and I stopped in Los Angeles to visit a friend of ours. And we went one morning to a yoga class. And I took this photo. Can I get that photo? This photo struck me. I don't really know anything about the backstory on this photo. I don't know who brought a cross into the alley behind the yoga studio and who put it in this receptacle. So I can't really tell you that part. But what struck me was the cross itself is not in the dumpster. It's in the recycling bin. Which occurred to me, an interesting pointer to what happens in church and in our spiritual lives. You see, I know many of you have come here from other traditions, like the woman in the reading today that Scotty read. You have become or became less sure of what you call yourself. Or at some point, you decide to make a change in your spiritual life. I've heard echoes of the first sermon ever given in this church in your stories, the one that says the old dogmas are outdated and irrelevant. The one that said people will come to this church looking for a chart and a compass in their spiritual lives. That was in 1899, and it is still true today. The best description I ever heard of some of the moves that many of you have made in leaving the faiths of your past to come into this community was said by a member of the church who said to me, it wasn't so much that I moved away from my church, but my church moved away from me. And I've heard the stories many times. You know, we ask our new members every time we have a new member dinner to tell us what they look forward to, what they want to engage with in the church. And inevitably, by the third person who speaks, we're hearing the story of where they have been and how they came to our doors. They're always moving stories. Like the story of the young man growing up gay in a gay-bashing church, who felt that deep, soulful disconnect with what he heard in the pews and in the mouths of his fellow Christians, with what he felt in his heart. We've heard the story of the couple whose church moved away from them as the church became more strident around issues of abortion or some theological issues or same-gender marriage or heaven and hell. And they noticed that their church seemed more intent on solidifying an idea rather than helping people deepen their soulful responses to those ideas. And I've often wondered why we like to tell each other the stories of our religious wanderlust, our spiritual paths. Part of me thinks it's because we don't have an official dogma to reaffirm here with each other at coffee or in accountability groups or in Sunday schools. I imagine that the new members' dinner at First Baptist or the Smithville Methodist Church, participants tell each other how they love Jesus and feel committed to him, and so they felt they had to join the church. This theology is strong and it is very clear. Accept Jesus, live like Jesus, worship Jesus. And it seems to me, in fact, I know that Unitarian Universalists just don't have it that way, and in some sense, we will not have it that way. I'm not saying you can't have Jesus here. In fact, at this time of year in Lent, we move toward the story of Jesus. That character becomes rather important as we lead up to Easter. But our faith offers questions and ponderings and stabs at the truth alongside of suggestions for thoughtful spiritual responses to the people we meet and the situations we find ourselves in. We offer a chance at making ambiguity purposeful. We offer a chance to make devotion real while not pointed at one entity or hero, but toward living a deeper, more thoughtful life. We seek to make ways in which we know and experience beauty and joy and freshness in the lives we lead, as well as in the terrible truth of our capacity to fail each other and our world. But this leaves us with a rather complicated mission. If not worship him, live like him, love him, and him only, then what? What I have noticed is that we tend to fill the need for certainty, this normal and natural human response to the many ways in which we seek meaning in our lives. We tend to fill that need by pointing to a common foe, which is our pasts. And sometimes I've noticed we scapegoat our pasts rather than seek to transform them, living only in reaction to theologies and people and places of worship that hurt us or moved away from us, even as we were moving away from them. And so we join the wandering people of faith who travel between places of worship with an unending desire to find peace, yet never arriving at the promised land. I read this recent study about Americans and how they experience their faith communities. It said almost half of American adults have changed religious affiliation at least once during their lives, leaving their childhood faith mostly before they're 24. And many of those changed religions more than once. The reasons that people gave for changing their religion or leaving their religion altogether differed fairly widely. The group that has grown the most in recent years is due to religious change is the unaffiliated population, those who have no affiliated identity. 2/3 of former Catholics who have become unaffiliated and half of former Protestants who have become unaffiliated say they left their childhood faith because they stopped believing in its teachings. Roughly 4 in 10 say they became unaffiliated because they do not believe in God or the teachings of most religions. And many people who left a religion to become unaffiliated say they did so because they think religious people are hypocritical and judgmental. Because religious organizations focus too much on rules, and because religious leaders are too focused on power and money. Now, I don't disagree with most of that analysis, in fact. At one point in my life, I would have said almost all those things. But now this saddens me, this reality. It's not because I can't find examples where all those things are true. It's because I wonder what kind of society we will be if we convince ourselves that there is nothing to believe in, if we give up all moral guidelines, if we empty out our faith communities and leave them barren and irrelevant. I think if this trend continues to expand, we will fail each other in ways we have not yet imagined. And this brings me to the two readings I chose today. One is a story of a young woman who wonders why she is out of sync with how others understand her Christian faith. She sounds fairly logical to me. The old dogmas don't work. Her church is moving away from her. She is seeking something deeper and more nourishing. That sounds familiar to me. The other reading is about a skeptic who is stumbling through parenting like all of us who have children in this room. He is troubled by his daughter singing the old songs, "Jesus loves me, this I know," as he sits in the Smithville Methodist Church. But the fact is, he says, he couldn't find a better story to teach her. I love that line, you can't teach disbelief. And the one about you can't teach your child that evolution loves you. It just doesn't cut it, he says. The story stinks of extinction and nothing exciting happens for centuries. The poem poses a dilemma I call the Smithfield dilemma. That is not only the poet's but ours. And I think it reflects humanity's great desire for stories and heroes and paths to follow, not just children's desires for those things. That is what I like about my photo. Remember, the cross is not in the dumpster but the recycling bin. The picture asks us if we will recycle and reuse and reinvent the heroes and the stories and the paths we have been on instead of cutting them off once and for all. It asks, can we find new ways to see them, to use them, to embrace them rather than reject them or let them have a poisonous power over the rest of our lives? Now, I think we all have a need to make sense of life in this way, and religion has been there to answer these dilemmas many times for better or ill. I can't tell you how many times my children have asked me, are we Christian? Is there a God? Is Jesus God? And I can't tell you how many times I have made the mistake of trying to teach them disbelief when I should be leading them to things they can follow. In my better days, I would answer, we're Christian in the way that we love who Jesus was as a man. We think God is all around us and embodied in purpose and love. And Jesus taught people to seek out God in their lives and treat each other with compassion and serve those who are less fortunate than we are. These are the kinds of answers that don't conflict with what we stand for, but lead to more questions and stories and even heroes to follow. This is a type of recycling that we all might need to do with whatever we need to put in our recycling bin, because it helps us shape visions of who we want to be, what kinds of people of faith we want to be. Do we want to be teachers of disbelief, or believers in teachings that guide our hearts and souls for our sakes and for the world? What kind of person do you want to be? Now, I think this church offers some kinds of answers to that, actually. I think here we learn to be translators of complexity. That is why we people of faith are here not just to settle for easy answers. We have the responsibility to not put up with shallow or illogical theological answers in our lives. It means we have to deal with questions like what is God and who is Jesus and what is our responsibility as human beings to each other. We also learn to be willing to see ourselves as people of faith, and we cannot be afraid or shy about that. We have to see ourselves as joining the chorus of the faithful, proclaiming that religious life is not just about leaders who want power and money, but rather about communities such as this that take evolution and Jesus and so many other lessons and heroes and paths and recycle them into significant ways that change lives and communities. It means we have to be rational in our thinking and encourage each other at the same time to surrender. To surrender our spirits to the mystery of being alive. I think that surrender comes in allowing worship to crack us open, to expose a deep felt place within us, to allow us to enter into prayer, to be courageous, to be hopeful, even while knowing we are frail at the same time. When I ask members of the church how they want to grow spiritually, I hear them describe something that looks like maturation, the kind that looks like becoming less reactive and more proactive. It looks like someone who knows what they believe but is willing to change, someone who knows where they came from and the traditions that they were raised in, but doesn't live at odds with them, rather holds them in esteem, if not at arm's length. Maturation looks like someone who isn't afraid also to get on their knees and call out in prayer, God of many names, here I am, hear my prayer, hold me once in a while. After 10 years with you here in this church in Dallas, Texas, a place I never even thought of, I know this much. Because of this church, the ministry that you have given me, the ministry I have received, and the ministry I have given, because of this church, I am a better person. The great gift I know that I have received, and I hope you receive as you take more steps on this campus and deepen your relationship here, is to become more joyfully deep, more genuinely inclusive, and more rationally spiritual. And that is the recycling we must do. To take who we were and who we are and transform it into who we want to be. If your spiritual recycling bucket is anything like mine, it is overflowing. And it starts with knowing that we are frail yet powerful people, that we have stories to learn and heroes to follow and spiritual directions and a moral grounding to cultivate for the good not only of ourselves but of our families and our communities. This is the way to freedom. This is the promised land that we are looking for. May you be a worthy traveler on the paths of spirit and a courageous sojourner on the way to freedom.